Hello everybody and welcome to Facebook Friday. It's Friday the 29th of January. Gosh, there we go. Goodbye January and welcome to the second month of 2021, very much coming up very soon. I'm Kate Wakelin. I'm the Net Patient Support Nurse with Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia. And every Friday I join our Facebook private discussion group community and later on via YouTube, join everyone to have a bit of a chat about a relevant topic related to neuroendocrine cancer. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to talk a bit today about positive thinking and the good, the bad, and maybe the ugly. So I'm looking forward to delving into that a little bit more. But before I continue, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I am joining you from, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people, and would just like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. One of the things I love about where I live is it's very close to the Yarra River, which is called the Birrung in the Woiwurrung language. And today, I don't know where you are joining me from, but today in Melbourne it is pouring rain. So I'm thinking about that water flowing through to the river, which and we're soaking our gardens on the way, which is really fantastic. I just wanted to acknowledge that acknowledgement. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I wanted to extend that acknowledgement of country through to where you are joining me from. So knowing that people are joining me from all corners of the country, so it's great to be along today. Before I go to the topic of the day, there was a question that came up in our Facebook private discussion group last week, and I don't feel like I managed to answer it properly. I might have gone down a little bit of a side tangent and answered another question, but when I was looking over the conversations from the week, I thought, I don't think I really actually answered the question the person hopped in to ask in the first place. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just talk about it during Facebook Friday, and then you can probably, because usually if one person's asking a question, it's a question other people are interested in too. So it was regarding the NET test. And I think this person was seeing a doctor who may not be seeing a lot of people with NETs, but may have read about this test called the NET test, and wondered if it was available in Australia. So I have a very short answer for you today, and then we will come back to you, because I actually think this will be a really great topic for a Facebook Friday in and of itself, this test. It's more than I'm going to cover today, but just basically to say it's not a test that is available in Australia at the moment. It's been subject to lots of conversations at the medical conferences, and there's certainly lots of research and clinical trials and things being done into this particular test, but it's not available in Australia. So I hope that answers that question. It's a really very brief answer to say we're not doing it here. At the moment we don't have enough evidence we consider to be doing it here, but I would love to get actually one of our specialists along to get more information about that test for you, because it might be something that down the track we are talking a bit more about, and it may become available later down the track with the findings from more research. So I hope that helps. So let's talk about positive thinking, and this is something that we hear an awful lot. I know for lots of people when they receive a new diagnosis like neuroendocrine cancer, but often any other kind of serious diagnosis, people come out of the woodwork and I guess they're looking for something to say. It's hard to find the words, any words really, that fit when there is something really hard going on. And so often people will say, well, think positive, and it sort of rolls off the tongue, positive thoughts, positive thinking, stay positive. And so people say it really because they're wanting to help. They're wanting to say something to fill the awkward void that you feel, like that sense of panic of this person's just told me something that is really hard and there's not really any good words. So you end up sometimes filling the silence with words that aren't good because there's not any good words. And so thinking positive is something that sometimes often we have other people telling us to do. And also I think it helps us get a sense of control that, often when we're talking about cancer, we feel like we can be at the mercy of the other people giving us treatments, or, waiting for something external to maybe work on us, like the injections or whatever. But thinking positive sometimes can go into the other range of, I know we talked about this last week with complementary therapies, that for a lot of people, they're important in terms of having a sense of control yourself, that you're doing something to contribute to your well-being and to your cancer, fighting your cancer. So I guess the question is, does it help? And that's why I really titled the talk, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, because often we think, oh yeah, this is a good thing to do, this is a good thing to say, but does it really help us? And I wanted to have a look at the research and say, well, are there some, is there some evidence, is there some scientific studies to say, does positive thinking help people with cancer? Do people who have a positive thinking attitude have a better outcomes? Those sorts of things. And actually the evidence is really limited. In fact, most of the evidence says that having a positive attitude doesn't actually change the outcomes. And so I think that can be really reassuring for people. If you're not feeling positive, it doesn't mean your cancer is going to get a gallop on. And I think this is actually something, that's really important to emphasise, and we will come back to some of this stuff as well. Having said that, there is some evidence around some of the behaviours that we can engage with when we're feeling very stressed. So, for example, I know when I'm stressed, I tend to hit the chocolate pretty hard. So my cupboard may have had a bit of a nibble last night, my chocolate stash, but a lot of us do kind of turn to comfort food or comfort drink. Sometimes when we're stressed, we can feel disempowered and not feel as motivated to exercise or to eat well or to do the things that we know we need to do for ourselves to keep ourselves well. And sometimes also when we're really stressed, we're also not sleeping. And so these things might well contribute to how well our treatments are working, or how well we're tolerating treatments, or how or our side effects, our symptoms of our treatment. So although that we know that not thinking positive doesn't make cancer grow any faster, but it's not necessarily to say, oh, it's fine and great to feel miserable either. So it's about striking that balance and knowing when we need help with this and what we can do. I guess one of the things that I observe for people who are trying to think positive is that sometimes they can end up feeling stressed about feeling stressed. And there's actually a well-known in the area of psycho-oncology, which is the more recent study that I've done. There's a doctor called Dr. Spiegel who talked about it, framed it in this really fabulous term, which is the prison of positivity. So sometimes people can feel a bit trapped in this expectation that they will always feel great and cheery and chirpy and optimistic about their situation. And actually, for most people, that's actually pretty impossible. Actually, it's pretty impossible even just with the normal run-of-the-mill challenges of everyday life. Cancer aside, we'll all have days where we're feeling great, and we'll all have days where it feels really hard. And that can feel really isolating for the person, because if you're not feeling positive but everyone around you wants you to be positive, it can mean that you feel trapped. You can't talk about the way you're feeling. You can't talk about the hard stuff. And it can actually make you feel worse. So we don't want that. We actually, we want to acknowledge where people are at, knowing that they'll be in a whole heap of different places, and it doesn't always have to be in a positive space. I just wanted to take a bit of a sidebar at this point and contrast this with depression. And it's a bit of a murky line between not feeling positive and feeling depressed. And this can be hard to judge when you're in it, because sometimes when you're depressed, you can you lose some of the insight into what's a normal reaction anyway, and so that can drain all of your emotional energy, but also your sense of insight into whether this is an overreaction or whether this is a normal reaction. So I did a previous video on depression. It was ages ago, but I will put a link to that in the notes. But what we do know also is if you're feeling depressed or you're feeling low most of the time, that does impact on your quality of life. And we want to be doing things, we want to be helping people to maximise their quality of life, regardless of what's going on disease-wise. So we'll talk about that a bit more too. So I guess, really, is it realistic to be thinking positive, to be feeling positive all the time? And I started to make a list of all the factors that NETS affects for people, for you as a group of patients. Most people with NETS go on to some form of treatment, and so we've got a raft of side effects that can make you feel unwell physically, can also affect your mood. Most people with any sort of cancer have to take time off work, even if it's just to attend appointments, but sometimes you might be actually unwell and not able to work. People with NETS might have lots of symptoms that mean work is really tough. So, like I've got a bloke in remote Western Australia who drives a grading truck, and, so going to the toilet lots of times a day for him has meant that work has been really very difficult to maintain. Home life is often very different. Going through a cancer diagnosis and cancer treatments affects our relationships. It affects the way we parent. It can mean that there's less fuel in the tank, energy-wise, for those relationships that we want to be able to be putting energy into, and that can make us feel guilty. Sex drive often goes out the window, and so that intimacy and warm comfort that we get from our relationships under normal circumstances, all of that might change. Often there's a financial impact when you're going through a cancer diagnosis. Treatments, even if they're funded, there'll be an out-of-pocket expense. There's the cost of parking, there's the cost of meals and things if you're out, if you're having treatment, the cost of transport, the cost of not working, the cost of seeing a dietitian, seeing a naturopath, seeing a massage therapist, all of those things, the costs add up, and we know that financial toxicity for people with cancer, and particularly people with NETS, is really significant. And that's really stressful when obviously most people have got financial plans and commitments, and cancer can really change that. With NETS, often the tumours are advanced by the time we are able to diagnose them. So it's not always the case. Sometimes we find NETS when it's just one tumour and we're able to do an operation and take it out. But then there's the ongoing uncertainty about how often to have scans and tests, if they're required at all, what if the cancer grows back, and so there's the anxiety around that. But then if you've got tumours in more than one place, there is the uncertainty about prognosis. A lot of people with NETS are told to, make preparations for things to not go well, and then, that can be then years later, they're still kind of thinking, well, do I still need to be worried, and how worried do I need to be? So facing an uncertain prognosis has an ongoing load from an emotional, health point of view. On top of all of that, lots of people with NETS have tumours that are secreting hormones that affect our mood. So some of those hormones make us anxious, some of those hormones might make us feel sad or low or depressed, and lots of people with NETS will have an impact of the disease that results in fatigue and lack of energy. So is it really realistic to think positively all the time when we're grappling with all of these challenges? And is it just kind of putting on a veneer, putting on the high gloss lipstick and the bit of blusher and the bit of eyeshadow to put on a happy face and fake it, when actually maybe inside you're feeling really crap? And does that actually benefit you, is my question. There's so much grief around this, and it's different to grief that you get from when someone's died, because actually this is an ongoing, it's an everyday, and sometimes it's a little bit worse every day, or sometimes you don't know what the next day is going to be like, but it's a non-finite grief. It's not that there's been this sort of line in the sand and then we work to integrate that line into in the sand in our lives. This is a constantly evolving feast where we don't really know what we're facing the next day. But we can learn some things from the grief that we observe and we experience in our lives when someone dies. And I think I've talked a bit about grief too in a previous episode or a previous video. But when someone's grieving, we don't expect them to be thinking positive. We don't expect them to be cheery and cracking jokes and smiling all the time. If someone's grieving and they're crying, hopefully we're comforting them, and giving them the space to express those emotions. And in a similar way, grieving in this sort of situation and having days where you're not feeling positive, we need to take a similar approach. And we need to take a similar approach with ourselves too, and go, well, of course I'm not feeling positive. Like, look at all of the things that are hard at the moment that I'm grieving. And, if someone had died in my life, I'd certainly be, maybe, hopefully, being kind to myself and allowing myself a little bit of human kindness and understanding, and going, okay, of course this is rough. So what do we do about this, knowing that the negative emotions are really normal, that actually positivity isn't shown to actually improve cancer outcomes, but by the same token we want to help people live their best life. Sorry, it's such a cliche. But we want to empower people and help people to identify ways of getting the best quality of life, to get the best value out of these days that are filled with such uncertainty. So I wanted to talk about some of the strategies, because these are the things that we always come back to. The first thing to say is it's so valuable to talk with someone else about how you're feeling. And that's because, as I said, the line between a normal grief reaction or not feeling positive and full-on depression, it can feel very murky. Even for a professional, that's something that's quite tricky to assess. So please talk to someone about the way you're feeling. And I guess one of the things I'd encourage every person with NETs to do, and actually every carer with NETs, like every person affected, you'll have lots of people in your life who will be, they'll give you some nominal support, they'll be your cheer squad from the side, but actually sometimes you need someone to run that marathon with you. And I know, like, I'm a runner, so that's my go-to analogy. I know, if I think about the last event that I ran, there were heaps of people who gave me little comments on Facebook. Some people actually hopped in, some of my personal friends actually hopped in and sponsored me for that run to raise funds for Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia, which I thought was extraordinary and generous and wonderful. Some people asked me, they checked in the day afterwards even and asked me how I was feeling and checked if I could walk, if I was still alive after that run. But actually, I also had a fantastic bunch of people who would come with me on my training runs, who slogged some of those hard kilometres. They showed up on days where it was raining. They showed up on days where it was hot. They braved the Melbourne Magpie springtime swooping fest. And I even had a friend who ran the whole event with me. So 21.1 kilometres of my whinging, Catherine endured. And so in our cancer journeys, sorry to use the journey word, but it's another cliche, but we need to find the travelling companions who will provide us with that authentic empathy, that you can be yourself with, that you can show up in your pajamas, your metaphoric pajamas, and go, you know what, today's not a good day. And they're not going to be trying to talk you out of that. They're going to listen and be there for you in that painful part. So talk to your doctor, talk to a counsellor or a psychologist about how you're feeling, but also let's get your support team right so that you've got the mix of people. And that can be physical friends, but sometimes it's friends that you meet in support groups or online in groups like our private Facebook discussion group as well. Expressing the way you're feeling can be really powerful, and we know this in other types of grief. For some people it's writing all down. Actually, for some people it's just writing down a list so that they can look at it all and go, oh, okay, well, no wonder I'm feeling so rubbish. There's all of this going on, and that in itself can be really helpful. Or even just making a list for the doctor for next time you're going to see them, so just to capture some of those whirling thoughts that are flying around your head. But for other people it might be painting. Doesn't matter if it's awful painting. It can be a scribble or a doodle, or sometimes it's actually doing a mandala, so a structured drawing or colouring even, so there's lots of artistic things that you can do. Doesn't have to be high quality to be helpful, which is really good. Sometimes it's about listening to or engaging in music. And ages ago, I think I'll share this as well. Ages ago, we actually had a couple of people contributed, a few people in fact, contributed to a Spotify playlist for our unicorns, and I think it was the Never Ever Give Up playlist. So I'll share that Spotify list again because I'm sure there's lots of people new to our group who won't have come across that. And I love listening to those songs. I often listen to those songs when I'm out running because it reminds me of the things. This is the music that you guys are listening to help you keep going. So maybe I can, gain some benefit from that as well. And then look at some of the old nuggets, like getting information about your cancer, reassuring yourself of what you know, the facts, making sure you get enough exercise, making sure you're moderating that alcohol. We know that sometimes that can be really great for people, but then long term, is it a healthy coping mechanism, especially if your liver's a bit wonky? So just check in with yourself there. Is this a drink that's actually going to help you long term or not? No judgment there. I'm a bit of a fan of the wine myself. One of the doctors, I have to quote him. I heard a great quote, only drink the wine that's nice. So that's a really important point to make. But, check in with your team about that and check in with yourself and whether you're drinking to excess. Getting enough sleep's really important, and it's hard to sleep if you're feeling worried. So I haven't done a Facebook Friday on sleep. I actually think that might be one that I'll add to my list because there's things that we know that do help. So I'm going to come back to sleep, but trying to get enough sleep, and sometimes that's having a nap during the day and having a sleep at night. Sometimes people find that if they nap during the day, they don't sleep so well at night. I'm not going to go into that in lots of detail, but it's a topic for another week. Eating healthily, so getting some of every colour in your fruit and your veggies, trying not to go too far down the processed food route. Vitamin chocolate is wonderful, but too much can make you feel pretty revolting, and for some people it's a trigger food. So finding out the feel good foods that are just not just about the first mouthful but are actually going to help you feel good an hour later, a day later. Your tummy's going to thank you for them afterwards. I think the other thing is trying to find a balance between the tough stuff and engaging with the tough stuff that we know we can't avoid that. But trying to make sure there's some other things to redress that balance, because if it's all really tough, I don't know if you can see my hand, but it's like the scales are going to always tip in that direction. You're going to feel like that's the dominant narrative in your life is all about the hard things. So doing some things that are fun, it just sounds so trivial, but it's so important. So that might be the music and the creative and the expressive stuff, or sometimes that's about getting the hard feelings out there. So that might not feel like fun. But sometimes it's about distraction, sometimes it's about listening to funny music or uplifting, upbeat music. Sometimes I've got a friend who was going through a really terribly tough time, and she resorted to Faulty Towers videos. So whatever it is for you, it's going to be different for each person. But maybe a relaxation massage, maybe it's about putting on some nicely scented hand cream, maybe it's about making a bed. That rings some people's bells. Don't look at my housework situation, but for some people, having a clean house, really, they know that helps their mental state. So whatever it is for you, finding a way of redressing some of that balance and getting some nice things in your life. And sometimes it's just about wearing soft clothes. Maybe it's about giving yourself a pajama day and showing yourselves a little bit of a kindness away. Maybe it's about wearing like fancy, very risque underwear underneath your clothes that no one else can see. That's just like your own personal little thing. And along with this, and I guess I'm alluding to this a bit, is humour can be really important in this. So it's a really interesting phenomenon that we can be both feeling devastated and laughing uproariously at the same time. It's a incredibly weird thing about human beings that we can actually do both. So it's possible to be acknowledging the grief and acknowledging the hard stuff whilst also feeling hopeful, feeling optimistic, or acknowledging that there's so much that we don't know, and there are very positive stories out there from people where they were surprised by how well things went. So we can do both, and sometimes we kind of oscillate between the two extremes, but actually it's sometimes in that space between those two extremes that we find our peace and our growth and and some of the insight that then we can share with other people who are newer to the whole world of NETs. So it's sometimes about finding that balance, and I would really encourage you to do that. So there's just a couple of notes that I would give for people who are kind of in the cheer squad. The first thing is know where your boundaries are. This is a long haul. It's a long marathon to be supporting someone who's walking with, who's running that. Not every day is going to be a good day for you either, being a carer. And sometimes the grief and the hard stuff is harder to engage with and acknowledge and get support for as a carer. So I guess just know that it's okay for you to feel like this is tough for you as well. It doesn't take away from what your person is going through, but it is, we know it's so tough for carers. When you're caring for someone with NETs and you're not sure what to say, sometimes it's okay to say, you know what, I don't really know what to say. Why don't you tell me what it's like? And actually, if you can listen to the person and let them tell you what they're going through and what they need, that can be really helpful. And maybe they do need cheering up, and they might say, look, tell me a funny story, find me some fun music, or go for a walk with me, or bring me some healthy food. But maybe listen to them, and maybe I think we can all learn from trying to hold back on the advice giving sometimes, and then waiting to hear what people want from us in terms of that support. I think it's okay. You can be encouraging and positive. You can be encouraging without putting people under pressure to feel positive all the time. And I guess that's a tricky balance. And you can check in with the person and say, am I putting too much pressure on you to feel upbeat and cheerful all the time? And you can give them permission. It's okay to have days where you're just not feeling it. But don't put on a happy face just for me. I'm a come as you are sort of friend. It might also be okay, sometimes you need to take a break from the person, and that's okay too. Gentle honesty is really important there. I guess we all need to acknowledge when there's times where, we're not fun to be around, or we need some space and time, and if we can get that for ourselves, that's fantastic. One of the spaces for our carers to be able to do that is in our carers Facebook group, so I'll make sure there's a link to that as well. I'm just going to have a little look at the comments, because I've seen that a few people have put some things in. So, and so there's some real appreciation there for people and their medical team, which is really excellent. I know that communication skills vary from doctor to doctor, but it sounds like there's some fantastic people out there, which is really fantastic to hear. The guilt of cancer diagnosis in a relationship is overwhelming. Yeah, I really hear that a lot, and it's hard because it's something you can't control. No one chose this, did they? And so, as I said, no wonder there's grief in it. No wonder you can't feel positive all the time, because it is no one would choose this. It's not my idea of a fun day, living with a cancer, and so it's okay to not be okay, if you like. Someone suggested Billy Connolly is my go-to for a good belly laugh. I am totally with you there. The accent in and of itself, you can't go past it. So yeah, but find your own thing. Like as I said, sometimes it's Faulty Towers, other people it's Red Dwarf. So find your thing. I've got a person who has said my partner's putting their head in the sand. I can't talk about my cancer. It's really tough. We will have there'll be people who can do the sidelines cheering. There'll be people who can do the practical support and be there to drive to appointments, but might not be able to. They might not be ready. They might not be able to do the emotional journeying. And I guess my thoughts are around just working out, well, who is that team? If it's not that person, we can't be all things to all people, So it's about, and I don't want to give trite, pat answers, but maybe it is about finding some other people who can be those travelling companions and turn up in the swooping magpie territory. I've got another person who's saying, yeah, their partner's finding it hard to talk. So, yeah, this is a really common thing too. I read a really interesting quote, and look, you can have too many good memes, but I thought this one was really amazing, and I took a screenshot actually of it so that I could remember it. And now I've just realised my phone's gone to sleep. I'm going to find it because I wanted to read it out. I wanted to actually tell you word for word what it was. It was from Instagram. So there you go. There's my my personal recreational habits uncovered. And it was a quote from someone called Brian Kyle Goodman. Never heard of them. They've got a tick beside their name, but I didn't actually research who they are. Don't know if it's actually their quote. But I thought it was a good one to read out. And it was, I told my friend that I am emotionally hitting a wall. And she said, sometimes walls are there so we can lean on them and rest. And I thought, wow, what a great quote. Sometimes walls are there so we can lean on them and rest. So rather than feeling like you're failing at something because you've hit the wall, maybe that's a sign to say, okay, hang on, can we stop a minute? Can we take a rest? Maybe we need to engage in a bit of self-care. Maybe we need to just sit in the grief and just express that and let that out and be authentic for a minute. And that's okay. We don't have to pretend to be happy all the time. But if you're depressed, I guess that's when we need to make sure we get you some help. I guess the other thing that I wanted to just check in with about, and coming back to this depression, so there are, I guess, some warning signs for people. If you're caring for someone with NETs, or you've got a carer and you're worried about them, or you're thinking about your own situation and you're thinking, well, how would I know if I need help, if I actually need to talk with my GP about this? Well, I think firstly, if you're wondering it, then you probably should. But there's some things, I guess there's some flags for us that make us think, well, maybe there is some depression at play. Maybe there's more active treatment or more active management that we need to help you with. So if you're finding it difficult to function on a daily basis, so if you're finding it hard to get out of bed and get dressed, and it's not just because you've got disease-related fatigue, that actually it's a mood thing. If you've lost the desire to do things that previously gave you pleasure. So if Faulty Towers has always been your thing and you're sort of sitting there watching it going, oh, I just can't even... Look, everyone will have days, but if you're having day after day where you're feeling like that, it's time to get some help. If you I think I alluded to this earlier, but if you feel like you're really relying on alcohol, like if you're drinking every day because you just want to numb, or if you're taking other drugs because you just want to numb, then maybe that's a sign that we need to get you some more help. If you stop eating regularly, sometimes people eat too much, and that's also a coping mechanism. But if you stop eating, if you're sleeping too much, and again, sometimes if you're sick, that's a really hard thing to discern. Am I depressed? If I've got no energy because, I've got tumours everywhere, or I'm having this treatment, or, I'm full of hormone, or because of my mood. And so talk with your doctor about what they think about that. If you're having a lot of trouble sleeping, if you're waking in the middle of the night and you're worried about things, certainly if you're feeling like you might hurt someone or yourself. Anger is a really tricky emotion. It's a really common one. It's often one which sometimes it's like a default emotion that we can feel if some of the other emotions can feel a bit hard. So sometimes sadness can come out as anger, or worry can come out as anger. So like the classic one is the mother who's screaming at her kids for coming home too late at night, when actually it was just that they were really worried for their safety. But so sometimes anger can be, and it's a difficult emotion to sit with as a carer or as a friend. But if you're worried about hurting someone else, or if you're worried about hurting yourself, and taking, if you're worried about taking your, you're thinking about taking your own life. And look, that's actually far more common than we talk about. It's sometimes quite a taboo subject, but it's not uncommon for thoughts of suicide to come across your mind when you're going through something really challenging and tough like cancer. It's not necessarily a reason to panic, to have a fleeting thought of, gosh, wouldn't this be easier if... But if it's a thought that you keep coming back to, if it's a thought that you find yourself coming to and resting on, certainly if it's a thought that you start thinking about, well, how would I? It's an alarm bell that things aren't all okay, and this might be more than just not just grief, but what we would consider to be the normal range of emotional ups and downs with living with a cancer diagnosis. And we start to think about, well, is there depression here that we need to treat, that we could get you feeling better and feeling more on top of things and enjoying your life more? If you're having anything from those lists, and especially if it's day after day after day, please talk to your doctor about it. You can also check in with me. I'm really happy for people to check in with me about these things if you're sort of a bit worried about someone in your life or you're worried about yourself. I guess my caveat there is that I'm part-time and I don't always manage to get back onto all the calls that come in on every day. Usually it's within a couple of days. So, and someone actually sent me an email overnight going, I tried to call you lots of times and I'm still waiting for your call back. And I'm like, didn't get a message from you. So please, if you ring my phone, send me a voicemail. I'll always call back if it's a voicemail, but if it's a missed call, I treat it like a butt dial or a pocket dial, or a spam, or, often it's a call where I don't have permission to call that person back. So the policy is, if you've left a voicemail, I will ring you back. If I haven't got back to you in a couple of days, maybe give me another go. But I do return all of the calls that come through on voicemail. And as I've said lots of times, email is great because that way you're on my screen. I can sort of make an assessment of how urgent it is for us to be talking. Sometimes it might be that I can ring you back straight away, but sometimes, as I said, it might be a couple of days. So give me a sense of what it's about. If you're on the phone, tell me what time zone you're in so I don't wake you up in the middle of the night if you're in Perth. I'll make sure the contact details are in the notes. So I hope that helps. It's such a tricky one. But I think it's like, we were talking about this in some of the comments leading up to the broadcast today, is that sometimes it can be a bit of an elephant in the room. And I wanted to finish by talking about our group motto. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll think, well, what group motto? So this is something that's part of the private discussion group, and there is a motto that's been around for ages, which a lot of people find really helpful, which is, for short, it's NEGU. So if you see that acronym, I'm about to tell you what it's for, and it means never ever give up. I think the thing that I like about never ever give up is that it's sort of acknowledging that you're going to have those days, aren't you? Like the fact that we even need to remind ourselves not to give up. I'm at, 17 kilometres of a 21 kilometre run. I don't even know how far, this is a marathon. You don't know where the finishing line is. And, do you really want to contemplate the finishing line? Because that's tough too. So the reminder to never ever give up is actually an acknowledgement that, wow, aren't we all finding it hard lots of the days? And that's normal and that's okay. And hey, we're here to encourage each other in our support groups and in our communities and go, you know what, I can hear that things are tough for you. Be encouraged, maybe tomorrow will be a better day. We're all here to help. There's things that we can do. Don't give up, we're in this together. So I worried about doing this post and people feeling like that might be a bit of a dig at the motto. And actually, I think the motto is perfect. It's a reminder to us all that, okay, I don't have to think about what it's going to be like 2 kilometres ahead. I'm just going to do this bit. I'm just going to do this foot in front of the other today. If thinking about getting through the day is too much, then maybe it's getting through the morning, or maybe it's just going to get through the next hour. Maybe it's getting through this scan and deep breathing my way through the freezing cold tunnel of the PET scanner. So I would just encourage you all to be encouraged by that. Keep using the words that are helpful for you. Let's try not to make assumptions about the words that are going to be helpful for other people. Let's listen to each other. Let's be kind. And look, I think you're all a great bunch of people. I love connecting with the people in our support groups and our broader community. I think it's just so valuable. So I just encourage you to don't stop being there for each other, and please be real, because, we don't need false teeth veneers going on here. We're about being authentic and about being real in the way we express ourselves and in the empathy that we offer to people. There's a comment. I'm going to read this comment out first before I was going to give you reminders about next week's support groups. So someone's just said, I have an expression that shocks some people with that annoying sort of opening statement. Wow, you look good. I reply to that with, still got cancer. Thanks for asking. How are you today? Well, that's very polite, that person. I know one person who responds to that going, what, did you expect me to be dead? So it's a slightly more confronting, cheeky response. I feel like that's something that people say. Again, it's like the thought that comes into people's heads when they don't know what to say. So they sort of say something that feels at least safe. Maybe it's better than crossing the road and avoiding saying anything to you at all. I don't know. You tell me. But I agree with you that I hear lots of people say that that's not really very helpful. So if you're a carer, if you're listening to this video going, I wonder what I should say to someone, maybe don't say, you look great, or, wow, you look so good. Maybe you could say, hey, how you feeling? How's the life going? And maybe, how are the kids? How's the job? Knowing that we are not just, you're not just a walking tumour, you're actually a person with lots of other things going on in your life, and it's nice to have the other things that make you acknowledged in those conversations with your family and friends. So that's just another tip for those watching at home from a carer's point of view, that having learnt lots from people with cancer, that's something else that's a food for thought. So I'm going to stop because I'm rambling, and I'm just turning around to get my diary because my brain will only hold a few things at a time. We've got a few support groups scheduled for next week. Now, coronavirus is still on our shores. We've done very well in Australia, and we're feeling relatively confident about, I guess we can feel confident that 2 weeks ago, there was probably very little virus floating around our community, but what we don't know is what virus might have been floating around our community a few days ago that we haven't got diagnosis for yet. So because of that, we are still holding off on our face-to-face support groups. Now, I know that's super frustrating. I am so frustrated by that because I can't wait to see my Melbourne peeps. I run the Melbourne support group. We haven't been able to catch up for a year now in person, and it's driving me balmy. And I don't know about you, but by the end of last year, if someone else had sort of suggested another Zoom meeting, I would have thrown my computer at them. So I know Zoom is not the same as meeting face to face, but it's what we're going to need to do for our official support group meetings for the time being. So next week's round of support groups will be Zoom meetings. So we've got one on Tuesday for Brisbane, Perth and Royal North Shore on Wednesday. Canberra, I think, is booked in for Friday. So I feel like I might not have sent any emails about those links to anyone yet, so don't panic if you haven't got links. I think it was on last week's list of things to do, and it might have just dropped off the end. So that's my job for this afternoon, is to create some links and make sure everyone's got the emails about those group meetings. If you get their link and you haven't been into Zoom, that's okay. We understand it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But if you haven't been going along, maybe consider giving it a try, because sometimes it's it's the next best thing, knowing that we can't have face-to-face support groups in person. The other thing I'll just say is that it's a different situation, and it's okay to catch up with people from your network informally. So if it works for you to have a coffee in a local cafe where there's a QR code checking in service, and there's you've got their cleaning protocols in place, and where you're well and the person's well and you're not feeling too immunocompromised, and that's okay, you can organise a coffee in a cafe or a picnic in a park with your local networks. We just can't run the official groups at this point in time because of that risk of COVID, and we're looking forward to such time as there's enough people being vaccinated that we can all feel confident about coming back to that. I can't wait. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it. So if you're part of those support group networks, stay tuned for emails about Zoom links, and you'd be really welcome to join us in those meetings. I continue to promise to have a speaker about coronavirus and vaccines. It's something we're working on. As you could imagine, all of the infectious diseases doctors and those experts, they kind of got their hands full. They're a bit busy, and I don't want to nag them too much. So it's one of the things on my list. I'm keeping on working with them and trying not to be too much of a nag. But I've got a few other things on my list as well. So the NET test is certainly one thing that's coming up that I would like to focus on. I'm going to talk about sleep. over the next few weeks. I'm just looking at the rest of my list and thinking, well, what other teasers have I got? We've got the ENETS conference soon. It's the big neuroendocrine cancer conference that's normally in Spain. That's virtual. That's going to be Zoom overload this year as well. But we're hoping to actually get one of our top oncologists to come in and give us a bit of a digest of the highlights from a patient point of view of, well, what's in the pipeline? What's the latest research going on internationally with NETs? Another one that I wanted to talk about was NETs and gallbladders, because that was a topic that came up in our Facebook group last week. I'm yet to do a session looking specifically around anxiety and NETs. Want to get a speaker to talk about advanced care planning, so that I've got a huge, and there's like the list is massive. I don't know, you can't see that, it's full of glare, but anyway, there's lots of things. But keep the comments coming. Often the conversations in our Facebook private discussion group are really the feeders, or the tips for what to do a video on next. So keep asking the questions, keep saying the things, and yeah, so I'll look forward to seeing you and catching up with you all next week. I hope you all have a good weekend. If you're in the southeastern corner of Australia, please stay dry and warm. It feels a little bit like July rather than January, but yes, look, stay well everybody, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye everyone.